Hello, everyone. Welcome and happy Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us for another installment of our product management leadership series. Today, we'll be discussing the very familiar and very critical topic of staying within the problem space. My name is Rina Alexin, and I am the CEO here at 280 Group. I have been leading the company now for the past 4 years, 4 short years, right, Ken? And we've been focused on bringing transformational change to product management teams everywhere. A common problem that we see, and I include everyone in this, including myself, is just our proclivity on jumping to solutions instead of staying with problems. The best product managers know that before going into the solution space, they must really thoroughly understand the problem. So this is today's webinar, and if you enjoy and like what you hear from today, I encourage you to check out our other resources on our website, as well as our optimal product management course. And I'm excited to introduce to you all Ken Feehan. Ken, I'm not allowed to play favorites, but
I'll tell them all. I'll tell them all.
But I'm really excited to be doing this webinar with you today. For our audience, Ken is one of our principal consultants and trainers at 280 Group. He has deep experience in product development and the go-to-market phases of the product cycle. He has worked and consulted basically everywhere, from hardware, software, cloud, infrastructure, and services companies. And he understands the business needs of each. He has over 20 years of product management and product marketing experience coming from top companies like Apple, Intuit, Dolby, as well as many startups and smaller tech firms. Thank you so much for being here today, Ken.
Excellent. Thank you, Rina. Thank you for allowing me to talk on one of my very favorite, most influential topics. This is one where if we can get a product manager to live on the problem side, we can change their career and get them promoted.
You are talking my language. I'm so excited. Before we get going with the webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, after this webinar, continue to stay engaged with the product management community by joining our LinkedIn leadership group. You can use it as a forum to chat about best practices and share tips. We'll be pasting that URL. I think it's already pasted in the chat box. Now, throughout the webinar, we really want to encourage you to interact with us and ask us questions. Ken, if you can advance the slide. You can use the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen to type in questions at any time. And if you want to use the chat box, I'll be monitoring that as well. In fact, Ken, with your permission, I'd like to, if there's any relevant questions, bring them while we're talking live. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, that would be great. I would love to make this more of a discussion and a little bit less of a lecture. So yes, so as the questions come in, let's talk about them.
Great, and that's what we'll do. We will be leaving time, however, for Q&A at the end, so we will have plenty of opportunities to answer your questions. I'll answer the most common one right now, and that is, can I watch the webinar later? And the answer is yes. All attendees will be receiving a link to view the webinar recording after it has ended. So now the agenda for today. Ken will be going through how to stay in the problem space, first defining what problem space and solution space are. He'll be going over some topics from lean thinking and show you how to further leverage personas and bring those problems to life. But first, I'll be going over just a little bit about 280 Group. Our mission at 280 Group is simple. We want to empower product professionals with the knowledge and tools to build products that matter. Unlike other companies, we're focused on the needs of product professionals everywhere. You can go to the next slide. So whether you are investing in your own knowledge and skills and want to advance your career, or you are a leader working on improving your team's effectiveness, we have the experience and the customized services that will get you to the next level. Check us out at 280group.com. Great, we'll paste the link as well. So now we're gonna get into the meat of the webinar, and we always start with a poll. So the poll should be launched now, and it's quite simple, right? Just answer, are you a problem side or a solution side product manager? And of course, for those of you who are confused, there's my favorite third answer, huh? Oh, we have at least one person saying, huh, Ken. All right.
No,
That's okay.
they're in the right place then.
Yes, you are all in good company. All right. So, based on these poll answers, very interesting. We've got an even split between problem side and solution side PM, and we've got at least 5 confused souls out there.
Oh, that's fantastic. It means that the content that we'll present over the next 30 minutes or so is just going to hit home and hopefully inspire some people to get to that next level of productivity in terms of product management. So thank you for the introduction, Rina. And let's go ahead and get on to some of this discussion here to see what's happening here. So let's go ahead and talk about this. I think I'm really qualified to talk about being a problem side product manager because I spent the first half of my career fighting against it. During the first half of my career, I spent a lot of time closely aligned with the engineering organization, with the development organization. And whenever there was an opportunity to meet with the user experience people, meet with the UI people, or meet with the engineers and talk about how the product would work, how many buttons would it have? Would it be on a mobile phone or would it be in a browser? Whenever we wanted to talk about how the product would work, I was just gravitated, pulled into those meetings, and I would come prepared with charts and graphics and mock-ups, and I would want to be heard in those particular meetings. And if you kind of think about it, it's kind of ridiculous. We had user interface professionals in that particular room here. We had engineers that knew the code inside and out, and there was usually 6 engineers, 2 user interface people, and then there's me, this poor inexperienced 20-something product manager. And I so wanted to be heard in these meetings, but their ideas were always better than mine. And frankly, there was a little bit of arrogance. They didn't listen to me. And so I was drawn to these meetings. I felt that it was my birthright as the product manager to help define and to design the product, and that my idea about whether there should be 2 buttons or 3 buttons should be heard. And frankly, it never worked out that way. I always left those meetings disappointed. And I felt that I really wasn't influencing those organizations. So for the first 10 years of my career, I wasn't very effective about influencing the design of the product. And the reason is because I was approaching this wrong. I was approaching this from, please listen to me, as opposed to doing something that real product managers should do. After leaving the fruit company and many of these bad habits behind, I had a short stint at a company called Intuit. Intuit is this huge North American powerhouse company. And they did product management very differently than what we did at Apple. They still had those meetings with so many of the engineers and with the user interface people, but when the product manager walked into those meetings about how we would develop solutions from this particular problem, they had a specific role in mind for the product manager. The product manager was supposed to contribute to that meeting, but not contribute whether there should be 1 button or 2. The contribution expectation for the product manager that I learned at Intuit and that I've used to this very day is that the product managers would bring in personas for users and buyers, which we'll talk about here, but they bring in these ridiculous life-size posters, and across the bubble written above us would be the persona name and their job title. It would usually include a couple of quotes that the customer would be saying about the problem that they had, and there would usually be 2 or 3 of them. There would be 2 or 3 of them, and it was our job at Intuit as product managers to actually establish these personas and the customer problems that they represented, and to make sure that everyone on this creative team of people was working towards building a solution to the particular types of customer problems that were happening here. Now, when I went into this meeting with Intuit, the second one where I had developed the personas and represented the customer problem, I actually found that I was hugely influential in affecting the design of the product. But I wasn't doing it by saying the button should be blue. I was doing by setting up the meeting to focus upon the needs of specific types of customers and what the problems that they were. I could very much be influential in creating a superior solution for customers, not by arguing about what colors things should be, but by actually establishing the customer and establishing a persona as the emphasis of the development effort that we were doing. the engineering team was demanding of this. As a matter of fact, if they felt that we didn't create enough of a customer problem, if we weren't specific enough this particular problem, they pushed back on us as product managers. And I can tell you that the process of product management bringing these life-size personas into the room and establishing what the actual customer problem was, the problem that customers wanted to pay into it to make go away, made us very influential over the particular product. We just did it in a different way. Instead of arguing about features, it was our job to inspire the development team, to inspire the user interface team with inspiration for who the target customer is and what problem it was that they had. And we did it with these life-size cutouts of real people with their names on them. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. But
I can definitely attest to that, Ken, that even at 280 group, that you always, whenever we're having a discussion, you always bring it back to the persona. And this reminds me very much of the, also, if you don't have one of those big cutouts, you can start with having the empty chair in the room, maybe like the empty, right? The empty Zoom box, if you will.
It's so true, and Rina, here we are, a bunch of seasoned, crusty old product managers in the room. There's 7 or 8 of us at the particular company. We love to jump into the solution space. We love to, well, it should be an email. And it's just like, forget it. Don't tell me about the solution. Tell me more about the problem. And then we come up with a better solution, usually faster. So let's go ahead and talk about these terms. Let's talk about solution space and problem space. When I talk about product managers that live in the solution space, I worry about product managers that are arguing or that are negotiating for how something will work or how something will look. If you find yourself in a meeting with people and they're asking you, what size should the button be? Should this be on 2 screens or 3? Then you are in a meeting where they're talking about the solution space. And the solution space is not the place where you're going to inspire people to be great. You're just going to be another vote in a room full of engineers where if it was a democracy, you would be outvoted 8-1. So you don't want it to be a democracy where you're outvoted. You actually want to influence that room. And it's very hard from the solution space to do. So if you're asking questions about how it's going to look or how it's going to work, you know that you're pretty close to the solution space. If you are effective of being and living inside the problem space, then the questions that you're asking or answering as the product manager is who's the customer and what problem do they want to hire us to fix for them? Why is this user more important than any other user? And hey, wow, Ken, that person has a lot of problems. How should we prioritize that? Which of these problems should we address first? If you are the product manager working in the problem space, you are living in the second part of this particular category. Who's the customer? What is the problem? What is the priority of this particular problem? And why is this more important than the others? And again, the goal here is to make you influential. The goal is to have the development team develop the products that the customers value highly. And if you were to ask me which course I should take, whether I should take the solution course to this problem or the problem space problem, I would say you can be significantly more effective and your products can be more productive and more valuable in the marketplace if you spend more time in the particular problem space and
Ken,
asking those questions.
Yeah, I have a question for you here, because we did have a lot of people who identified as solution-based product managers. And I want to make it clear, you're not saying that a product manager should never live in the solution space, correct?
That is correct. It's just we want you to spend more time than you probably are today in the problem space. And go into the solution space, but only after you've established a very comprehensive, a very structured, a very purposeful problem space, so that you can actually consider multiple ways of doing the solution space. Don't jump into the solution space too fast. Live back in the problem space. I can tell you that there's a certain DNA aspect of being a product manager, at least the product managers that I've worked in before, where we want to create innovative solutions. Many of us are frustrated engineers that want to write code. And so we find ourselves just leaning into that and trying to imagine the solution. We need to work against that ingrained DNA instinct that we have as product managers and live in the solution space. There's already 8 people in the room that want to talk about the solution. but there's only going to be one person in that room that establishes who the target customer is and who the problem is. And if you skip doing that, then that team is rudderless to see what's going on here. So do prep the time, ignore delay the instinct to jump into the solution space,
Hey, Ken,
and play that role.
we have a participant who has raised their hand. I can let them on and have them ask a question.
But I've never done that before. Please.
Me neither. Let's go do it. Hey, Phil. You are here to talk. Just unmute yourself.
Phil, is this you?
Yes. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I get the principle of this, but it's sometimes quite hard to know where the problem ends and the solution starts, because I was never a developer, so I don't have that bit. And I'll never say that the box should look like this or that, but you do get dragged in saying, well, we need it to do this and that thing. And that's a bit different from saying what the business problem is you're trying to solve.
Yeah, exactly, Phil. So I certainly, I think I understand where you're coming from here. Is that you don't know quite when to allow the brainstorming of the solution to start to happen. Is that another way of saying your question?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Excellent. So I would ask you to do kind of an inventory of your strategic contribution at that particular point. And I would ask you, do you understand the specific type of customer that you're going after? Have you built a persona for it? And have you listed the 3 or 4 problems that they would like to have you solve as a particular customer? If you've done that, if you've established the target persona, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and if you have kind of established some quotes about what you've heard them say, then I believe that you've done much of the work here and you can start moving into that gray area here. But if you haven't done those sorts of things, sliding into the solution space can just be dangerous because you're not ready.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It totally does, yes.
Excellent.
All right, Phil, thank you so much for asking your question. I'm going to mute you.
Hey, Rina, that new thing worked.
It did.
It did. Fantastic. Okay, let me continue some of these things. As you're trying to represent that customer, that target customer in these particular meetings, I pay special attention to things that I label as customer pains and customer gains as I do the research necessary. Again, usually I build these personas. Usually I build these solutions of customer problems by doing a small number of interviews with customers. I build a persona and then I interview 5, 6, or 7 people in order to get the persona right. During that process, I figure out what customers find hard to do about the way they do it today. And maybe they're looking for it to be on a mobile device that they can do casually 24 hours a day, or maybe it's a problem for them to do it because it doesn't pre-populate a box. I try to find out what they find hard to do about our particular problem, and I label those things as pains of using the particular product. What can we do to fix a problem that the customer has? As I interview these customers, as I want to represent their needs here, I also try to find out things that we could do that would make them happy. Hey, pre-populate this field. Give me an estimate for what the answer might look like. If I do something repetitively time after time, can you make it so I don't have to check that box so many times here? I balance pains and gains, and I represent those in the personas and in the customer problems that I make it happen. I challenge the team to empathize with that customer doing their jobs, running into those things that slow them down, and wondering why the solution doesn't do more of the things that would make them super productive here. So I label things as pains and gains, and represent that on the persona, usually in the space bubble. The process of doing this problem representation, of understanding who these personas are, is actually a continuation of the lean product development process. The lean process, which is not what this webinar is about. Please look up lean if you're unfamiliar with it. But the idea that we put some kind of customer problem into the space and that we talk to more people and figure out if it's a problem that one person has or a problem that all 5 people have, we generally tend to want to build momentum on this. We want to respect the individual people giving us answers to these questions and the problems that they have. We want to be curious about the problems that they have, and we want to do a continuous process in order to help that user be more efficient and to reduce waste. So we actually follow some lean processes here. We create hypotheses, we discover the problems with these users, we then test them, and then we learn from them, and we spin this around. This goes into the process of actually identifying the problem that what happens here. Because ironically, sometimes your loudest customer will tell you that you need to do something to your particular product. And what you want to find out is does that problem affect all of my users, or is that particularly a piece of custom code that I have to write for one individual customer? Using this decision loop cycle, using this process of lean thinking, you can begin to put into some kind of a decision-making process, these individual feature requests from customers, because it is your job in life as a product manager to help your development team build something once that they can sell 1,000 times or 10,000 times here. It is less of the job of a successful and effective product manager to do a custom programming job for one customer. When you develop something to satisfy the needs of one customer, you're not a scalable emerging model of success. You're just simply satisfying the needs of one customer. We want to be on lookout. We want to find things we can build once and sell 1,000,000 times. And lean thinking and this lean process is something that I would encourage you to get back through this. Hey, Rina, we're going to jump into personas and talk about building them in just 1 minute here, but we have a poll.
Yeah, so the poll should be launched right now, and it's a simple question again. So do you use personas? Yes, no. I think the sales team uses personas. And I want to be learning a little bit more about how I should be using personas before I answer this question. So if everyone can please select one. Looks like we have a pretty good participation rate. So right now, about 2/3 say yes, and almost a third say they want to learn more. We do have a few people who say no or think that the sales team uses personas.
Excellent,
I love
man.
these questions.
More than half of the class uses personas as a product
Yeah.
management team,
Yeah.
and they're not hand-me-downs. They're actually good personas. I think this is fantastic. Excellent. So if you use personas today, then chances are I might teach you one small thing that you might be able to learn from. So please bear with me. We'll get through it rather quickly, but maybe there's one bit of wisdom that you can pick up. But if you don't use personas today, I'm going to give you an insight into potentially why, and then point you in the right direction here. What's going on here? Personas are your friends as a product manager. The personas are meant to represent the needs of a market segment that you potentially can address. And the main trick of personas that made these snap for me and made these be really effective is that you don't have one persona and you don't have 10 personas. I actually recommend that you actually have 2 or 3 personas. I like 2. The 2 that I like the most is, please tell me about the needs. Please build a persona that represents a person who uses my product every day, day in and day out. They log in the morning, they update something, they use the product on a regular basis. This can be a business to consumer product in the forms of I open up the Target application to go shopping at Target. This can be a business to business application. I'm a salesperson working at a small hardware company, and I use Salesforce as our CRM, and I use Salesforce on a regular basis. So I'm allowed to have opinions about whether or not the Target app is good for me as a user, or my business to business solution. I have an opinion about whether or not sales is good for me. These people directly interact with the product, and they represent the users of the system. And as a product manager, it is my intention to make the product easier for these people to use and more valuable. But they're not 100% of the people that I focus on as a product manager, because they don't represent necessarily the commerce part of this transaction. They don't represent the needs of the person who makes active business decisions about whether or not the business, the customer with the money in their wallet, wants to spend money on this solution for me. So I build up a second persona that always goes with me to these meetings that is represented the needs of what we call buyers. And if we were to go back to the Salesforce analogy, I'm a small hardware company. I live in Silicon Valley. My salespeople are the users, and I expect them to input information inside of Salesforce. Back at the office somewhere, there is a VP of sales or a director of sales operations who makes a specific decision whether to subscribe to Salesforce's cloud-based solution or whether they go to Zones or whether they go to some other CRM. There's someone back at the office that decides we've evaluated all of these and based upon our needs, we're going to choose to go in this particular direction. As a product manager, I have to take the needs of that buyer persona into account. I have to create a product that is valuable in their minds, that solves the problem that they want to do. And if I only create 2 personas out of all the personas that I could do, I want to represent the needs of the user, the person who interacts with every day, because if everybody hates using the product on a daily basis, eventually you will stop being used by your company. You can't get over not being useful to users. And I want to talk to those buyer personas. I want to show what the return on investment is of using my particular product. I want to give reasons why the buyer will think that spending money on our particular solution is better than going in any particular direction. So I build a persona. I build that life-size cutout that you saw in a previous slide and that you'll see in a slide in a future, and I give them a name. It's Fred, the salesperson, and I give Fred a face, and I make Fred human, and I talk about his frustrations, and I talk about the fact that he's going from sales call to sales call, and he stopped by a Starbucks to get a cup of coffee, and he needs to be able to update the process and the system in just a couple of minutes while he's waiting in line. That's the persona, that's the quote that I give to make this person come alive here. And I build the buyer persona. I build a persona, and I talk about, Betty, the buyer, back in the office, and I talk about her job title, and I talk about her budget quantities, and I talk about what would make her think our product was doing the job for it. So I build these 2 personas, and they come with me to the meeting. And if we're an agile shop and we write user stories, I write the user stories to align to the persona that we're talking about. And the engineers get to ask questions. The user interface people can come back and they can say, please tell me more information about this one. But I use at least 2 personas, and I make them either life size or half life size, and I give them a place at the table to talk about. And they represent the customers. They represent the problems that people want to work from. And I find it hugely effective to see what's happened here.
Ken, so you let me know if you want to answer these questions, but we have a couple questions coming in about user personas. Do you want to go through this slide first, or?
No, go ahead. And I've not seen the questions, Rina, so would you please
No, that's
throw them
why
out here?
I'm pausing them here. All right, so we have one here from Robert, who says that the examples that were mentioned in this webinar seem to be software related. How hard is this to apply to machines or hardware? I can answer that one.
Why don't you go ahead?
Well, I mean, the obvious one for me that I'm thinking through that is hardware related is, laptops that for a company. That one's an easy one. We have the users who use the laptops, and there's also the buyer persona that has different requirements around security, consistency, suppliers, right? So, we have to contend as a company, both from the company's perspective, meeting all of those requirements, while the user might have a personal preference on Windows or Mac. So that's just one example that, there's still 2 personas if you're selling something like a laptop.
Yeah, exactly. Rina, I had a student in my class 4 weeks ago, and he challenged me on this, and he said, Ken, you're all about software. You're talking clouds and stuff like that. Ken, I work for a company that makes cement barriers that are on the freeway that keep your car in the lane. How on earth can problems and user personas work at my particular company? And we worked it out. We talked about the person who lifted up the Jersey barriers off the truck and put them in place. We talked about the fact that they needed to be interlocked together, and that the pressures that user was under in terms of safety on the freeway, in terms of daylight hours, in terms of other things. We made a comprehensive persona based upon the user of the Jersey barrier. Let's see what's happening here. We did it inside the class. And we talked about the buyer of this. Well, the buyer is complicated. The buyer is usually something associated with the state or with the county. And there probably some buyer functionality. They don't know much about the freeway. So we actually had to detail this out for something that I would consider as far away from a software product or a cloud product as possible. And I think that is the Jersey barrier. So whether you are doing fertilizer, you can talk about problems and user personas and buyer personas. You can talk about the farmer who uses the fertilizer. I gravitate towards software products and cloud products because that's where much of my career was placed. But I have no problem reaffirming that this works just as well for physical products as it does for software products. And that I apologize that I gave the impression that this is a software thing.
I hope, Robert, that it has answered your question. If you're working on something like that, there are probably multiple personas you can use. So I have another one here that's in the similar vein from Mark. And he says, when you have a product that is used by different industries, and he points out something like Microsoft Excel.
Yes, love this.
Okay, you know where it's going. So do you develop personas for all the different types of users in each vertical, or only a couple? So how do you think about it from that? And I have a good answer here too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take the first whack at this one. So first of all, that is more complex. When you have a general purpose tool that's used from everyone, from people balancing their checkbooks to people sending spaceships to Mars, it is a bit more of a challenge here. But there is still the ability to have 4 or 5 of these target personas in mind to see what happened here. Maybe the data analyst at a tech startup is one of your personas, and the person at university who's doing their PhD process works. I like to rotate in 3 or 4 of these things per year and make the users real. And as a matter of fact, I've got one secret sauce here. And the secret sauce is that I generally try to focus upon the needs of one persona for each quarter that I'm in. I might take the fact that we're developing features in Agile in the spring and say, I'm going to pick stories that are all going to make the data analyst happy. And at the end of the quarter, send out a press release. Tell the sales team that we did something to make the product more useful and more of a problem solving towards that particular market segment. And then in the summer, we deal with people using Excel in order to manage the finances at their businesses. I try to, when I make that general purpose product, I try to pick some favorites and tell stories quarter after quarter. I pick the features that are going in to be developed in the Agile process, and then I send out a press release and make some news about how we made the product for that large group of users better. That way, everybody knows that I'm making the product better quarter after quarter. There's news on the website that says we made this product better. People see that we're making investments in it. Maybe they can't relate to the fact that we made the data analyst tool better, but they're at least seeing that we're continuing to up our game in this product. Rina, that's my answer. What's yours?
Yeah. Well, just quickly, because I do want to move on with the presentation, but I think that some of the tech companies that are really good at this, they choose the larger segments, and then they create versions of their products with templates that really speak to that segment and that persona. So I think it's a very much a product-led growth strategy, but those segments have to be large enough and user product enough for them to really merit having a persona developed. I see more questions coming in. Let's continue. We will get to Q&A also at the end.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you. Talking about problems is sometimes, oh, well, of course I should do that, but let's make this a little bit more real. Let's talk about some statements which we can actually talk about. Are these problems or these solutions here? And I think most of these are problems, but let's see if we vet them out here. Underneath this umbrella of the user persona that we talked about, I'm used to hearing people say things like, as a parent, I want to avoid filling landfills with dirty diapers. That is something I hear from customers when we interview people about newborn kids. We hear that back. We don't hear customers say back, I'll only buy green diapers or I'll only do this. we get the feeling from these types of customers that this is an important angle to them, and let's see what's going on here. So I bring that problem into the room and I brainstorm with the engineers and with the user experience people. What could we do for this particular problem? Another problem on the user side is I want the process to autofill addresses info for the customer. Well, it's sort of a solution here. I would classify this one as sort of more solution than problem. If I were to rewrite this one as a problem, is I'd like to process more invoices per hour. Can you consider doing that by potentially autofilling some of these fields for me? So hence that one is a bit of a line straddler. Another user problem is I want to be green, but I don't want to spend more. That's a quote that I've gotten by doing interviews with customers that were potentially doing green problems. These are problems that I could see on persona boards in those little bubbles above their heads. These would be quotes that would come out of their particular mouths. On the buyer side, I've seen people say these are real life quotes I've gotten from people. As a manager, I want to process more transactions per hour without increasing staff and costs. An actual quote from a buyer persona that I'd love to challenge my engineering and development team with. Point number 2 is, as a supervisor, I want my people to do fewer manual interventions. I love that. That's pure. And then lastly, I will work only with vendors who conform to zero waste policies. That's another requirement that's coming from the problem side of this particular situations. And when we can have a picture of people with happy faces and job titles and bubbles and names, and we have them associated with these problems, you influence what's going on in that room in a way that's very positive and constructive. And so if you see these kinds of issues, you know you're on the right track about potentially doing problem side here. We want to inspire people using these personas. Here's 2 templates for personas that were built actually in the last class that I taught here. Frida the Fisher person had some quotes from what it is that we said. And in the lower right-hand corner, we had some things which talked about what she was going for. And one of the things that we had going for, one of the things I challenge on my personas is I ask the product managers to represent what's likely to get that person promoted. And if we can capture back from the user that increased productivity, increased throughput, more efficient spending are things that are in the back of these people's minds about value that they would like to provide to their company, and that are likely to lead to promotions. You know, you get customer loyalty. You know, you get good feedings from customers when you're just simply working in alignment with them towards goals in common. And if you can get your customers promoted and get them bigger jobs, it's always a good thing to do. So we want to inspire the team by bringing these personas into it. We want to focus on quotes. Quotes are the most important thing. Spend 80% of your time capturing the quotes that the users say. They influence people. They can't be argued against. They're true in their very nature because they're quotes. Get your users promoted. And then lastly, bring these personas, bring these life-size things to meetings. They're impossible to ignore if they're sitting at the table with you. You're going to get customers are going to say that they've got big problems. They've got a lot of problems. They're not going to give you 2, they're going to give you 20. So use a prioritization tool such as old school Excel in order to prioritize the things and the problems that users have for you. Don't overwhelm your development team with 20 problems. Prioritize it, choose things that are most valuable and get them into development. This is just a simple, brilliant Excel process. List what the backlog items are, talk about how it's going to make users happier, talk about the revenue impact from them, and talk about how it's going to close gap with competitors. Use a 0 to 5 scale. And then once you filled it out yourself, take it out, sit down with the development lead, sit down with the salesperson and say, did I get this right? You'll be a data-driven product manager. You will be more respected and you will live more on the particular problem side. There's other ways to do it, would work out here. A few minutes ago, we were talking about how do I apply this? This is a picture of a pretty traditional roadmap that I have in my company. My company is agile. We have 4-week sprints to see what's going on here. As a product manager, I love agile. As a person, I don't know of a better way of doing agile, but I do believe that I can add some secret sauce to how I use agile that will actually make the sales and marketing team more effective and allow us to sell more. And that is that during the first quarter, during Q1 FY22, I can choose things off the backlog and put them into development. but I can also choose things off the backlog that are related to a particular persona. Maybe it's the user persona that's happened in, and I can choose things and put them into development. At the end of the quarter, I can have a product that is better situated to solve the problems of a particular persona that we're using. And I can send out a press release, and I can do briefings for the sales team, and I can do a webinar and a movie from this. I can do marketing and sales from solving customers' problems if I just kind of have a plan at the beginning of the quarter and I say, we're going to make this quarter all about Betty the buyer or Eugene the user. You can do this on top of Agile. There's nothing inconsistent about it. It's just you choose which products to take out of the backlog and to put into development. And at the end of the quarter, you make some news. Hey, this is what we did and this is what we invested in the product this particular quarter. Your job, so if you do this, if you follow this advice and if you live on the problem space, your job at the next meeting that you have with your development team is to establish personas with prioritized customer problems. Bring life-size representations of these users in with quotes along their particular space bubble. Tell the engineers that you're going to allow for brainstorming and creativity and that this is a safe place to come out with different ideas and to question the personas and the customer problems that are going on here. You want to create an environment where people are comfortable being creative. That's a goal for your next meeting with the developers. And then lastly is let the personas do the work. Put the personas in the room, introduce them, allow the engineers and the user experience people to read from them, and then volunteer to ask questions that they might have. Don't make presentations, don't take over the room. Let the personas do much of the work and try to keep them curious to see what's happening on here. Change the way you present these meetings. Don't be that person who went in like I did 20 years ago and say, I want to argue about the color of the buttons. Walk in with these personas, create a safe environment, and be silent and let them ask questions. As you embrace the idea of living on the particular problem side, I think you should potentially sit down with your manager in your next one-on-one and talk about how this is going to affect your job. You're going to potentially change the way you do product management, and you're going to potentially do more of some things, and you may do less of some things. Don't surprise people. Sit down with your boss, sit down with your product owner, sit down with someone who's in the development team who knows you, and talk about the fact that you're trying to up your game as a product manager and to inspire more creativity and to be better at your job. And so that's an important big deal. And then of course, print out your big life-size versions of your particular customers. Last slide in the presentation is you're going to know this is working when someone in one of those meetings stands up on the table and says, you know, we're not doing enough for Betty the buyer. We need to do more for Betty the buyer. You know that your plan is working when your engineers say we're not doing enough for these personas. When you get those quotes, when you hear people saying you're treating them too poorly, you're not doing enough for them, you just know what happens. And I promise you, this will happen to you. You will have engineers come back and say, nope, that's not enough. We need to do more. And maybe an engineer will come back and say, you know, I've been playing around with artificial intelligence lately, and I think there's an interesting way for us to apply artificial intelligence to this particular problem and to knock their socks off. When that sort of stuff happens, creativity flows, your relationship with engineers gets better, and God bless, we create better solutions for our customers. Become a problem side product manager, live on the side with the customers, reject being a solution side product manager, partner better with sales and marketing, partner better with your developers. All of this comes from simply focusing upon the problem and creating personas and letting those promotions do much of the work. And let's get you promoted by being a more strategic product manager at the company that you're at.
Okay, go. So just one more point. So we're going to be heading now to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Thank you so much, Ken, for all of this great advice. In fact, you've inspired me. Everybody on our product team is now going to get a new Zoom background with a persona in it. I love it. All right. So if you like what you've heard here today, now to the next slide. Well, continue learning more and learning more about all the core skills to help you build and manage products that matter. We have an optimal product management course, which teaches the fundamentals of how to become a strategic product manager. We have one that is starting in just a few weeks on May 3rd. And just for attending this webinar, we have a special promotion for $500 off the next course. We also have a digital course, so if you like that, you can also take that course instead. And now we will be launching our final poll. So we want to hear your feedback. Please let us know. We do listen to your feedback when we are thinking of new topics. And so it's good for us to know if this webinar was helpful or not so helpful. And now we will be going into the Q&A portion. If you have questions, I do encourage you to fill them out either in the chat or the Q&A. I'll start with this one from Hamad. The question here is, are you saying that the buyer personas are only ones created in the context of B2B?
Interesting, subtle question. There's a lot of discussion that happens around this topic among product management. The way that I answer this question is in B2C products, the user is frequently the buyer. In B2B products, the user is probably never the buyer. So if I'm buying a subscription to Spotify, I am both the user of Spotify and the buyer. So on the B2C side, I could be the same person. So I'm going to create a persona that probably has, is this valuable to me and is it easy to use? So I might be the same person on the B2C side. But on the B2B side, it's almost always two different people. And I think that's what we usually argue about as product managers. On the B2C side, it's usually one person who has both characteristics, and we need to talk to value and we need to talk to simplicity. But on the B2B side, it's always two different people on the B2B side.
Almost always. I will make an exception. If you are working in the gifting industry, there's going to be a difference between the user and the buyer persona. Same, I think the other common one is parents and children. So that is another one where it's different, but I agree with you, Ken. All right, so we had an earlier question today from James, and the question here is, well, how would you explain someone like Elon Musk's style to be great on both problem and solution space? Do you have an answer for this one?
Wow. So first of all, I just put a couple of people into a different category of intelligence. I put Steve Jobs, I put Elon Musk, I put Steve Bezos into these categories. I put Gates into this category. I put several people into a category that they're just simply smarter and better than anything that I deal with on a day-by-day basis. And frankly, I worked at Apple. I met Steve multiple times. As a matter of fact, I presented to him 4 times. This is my favorite line, and 3 of them went really well. So Steve and these people just do product differently. They do something inherently differently, and I can't teach people how to do product management or how to do product like Elon or Steve or Jeff. Although Jeff is actually pretty easy to emulate because his process is so transparent. So I can't tell you that Elon does this and that he's wrong. He's not wrong. He built a car that is phenomenal. He's getting us into space in a way that's phenomenal. But I don't necessarily know that we can teach that process because it's so entrepreneurial. It is so interesting. I like to cover the other 99% of the product management spectrum and say, as the other 99%. We need to do the everyday work of moving our products forward, being inspired, inspiring our creativity for other situations, and having a positive and successful influence upon the business. And that's the process that we teach. I can't teach people to be as smart as Steve or Elon or Jeff. And I don't necessarily know that they could do it. You know, I also can't play baseball and teach people how to hit like Barry Bonds. It just doesn't work.
I do think Elon is pretty good in the problem space, though. I think that really does help.
I mean, too.
His vision and all the problems that he is working on or his teams are working on, they're big. They're problems first, right? They're big problems first.
Yeah, exactly. And if you are a product manager and you have not driven a Tesla, I got to tell you, if you owe it to yourself as a product manager to go and drive and experience the car.
All right, we are not sponsored by Tesla, but we should be with their awesome stock.
Remember the parking lot when we had an office, Rina? What did the parking lot when we had an office look like?
Once upon a time. All right, so we have a question here from Stephanus, and the question is, to develop user personas, we really need to interact with the user frequently, discovering their pains and gains. So the question is really around, is it necessary to have these kinds of insights properly quantified? Meaning, I think it's more like the reach or the impact of those insights? Like, how do you quantify it, or do you need to?
I'm going to answer the question. I don't know that I'm going to give exactly the answer that's going on here, but I get answers to these questions by looking at how we're segmenting the market, and working within kind of an approved way that we segment the marketplace. And then I generally tend to pick the very center of a market segment. I don't pick an edge. I don't pick where two places overlap. I pick the very center of a unique market segment in order to make my personas. I want them not to be scaled or leveraged from other personas. And then I try to speak to a number of them. I build my proto persona, which is my guess, and then I interview one person, and then I change my proto persona with what I learned, and then I speak to a second and a third person, and I make smaller edits from this. But after the fifth, sixth, or seventh interview with these people who represent the center of my particular marketplace, I find myself learning fewer unique things with each interview that I do. And so I go through the process of speaking to these individual people, and Zoom and MS Teams has made it so easy to do these interviews online. 5 years ago, I used to have to fly all over the country, and I could do one a day, and I do thousands of miles. Now I can do one in the morning and one in the afternoon and still have time for lunch. But I pick people in the center, and I start interviewing them. And by the fifth, sixth, or seventh interview, I'm learning fewer and fewer things, and I'm more confident in the value of my persona and how they represent inside the marketplace. And so I can knock this out usually with no more than 10 interviews. I can build a pretty solid persona and understand their problems if I pick wisely. Some organizations I run into don't want product managers speaking to customers. You know, the sales team, we have a sales team, or we have a research team, or we have a customer support team. FYI, I got to tell you, if you're a product manager and you're dealing with information that was interpreted from another group that spoke to customers, I got to tell you, it makes it a lot more complicated. I like when product managers who are making decisions about roadmaps and ways that we're going to solve problems, I like it when we have access to be able to speak to customers.
And there are definitely some industries that have regulatory reasons why product managers are not allowed to talk to customers. We definitely see that as a problem. Ken, I think that actually dovetails nicely with this question that is around the sales team having personas. Are those the personas that this person should use? So maybe you could answer that question.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I've worked at a couple of companies where the sales team went through a persona process, and they were the first team at the company to do personas. They did it before we did it in product, and they built up these glossy personas about VPs of electrical engineering companies and VPs of buyers. And at the end of the day, I found out that if the sales team develops the personas, they usually have a slant for the sales process to use them. So I find out that the reason that they've got a persona that looks like that is because they want our salespeople to call on customers who conform to that particular persona. So I'm usually a little skeptical of personas coming from the sales team and going directly into the development team, because I believe they're actually pretty purposely built to inspire the sales team. And so I thank them. I try to get the same people's help who built those personas to build us some that actually represent the target customers for next year's product, not necessarily for last year's product. And so I try to leverage some of the skills, but generally speaking, I don't have the same personas that the sales team does. And I think that's probably a best practice. But the fact that sales team has personas, that's fantastic. They just sort of have a different purpose for them.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Ken. As a reminder, we might have time for maybe one or two more questions. So this question is around, I have a lot of different stakeholders, right, that could be personas. And I'm often prioritizing the needs of my major segment, and I'm not really putting a lot of attention on some of those minor segments. How do I balance that in my product? Otherwise, I have a lot of unhappy, like maybe a smaller percentage, but a lot of unhappy users.
Wow, that is a great question. To me, it by the way, there's not one answer to that question. There's 100 answers. And the problem is actually the work that you have to do. So if you don't have enough resources to get to the second tier customer, to the third tier customer, then you run the risk of your product becoming very vertical oriented. It becomes a very big solution for your very biggest customers, and you miss the width, you miss the long tail, to use a word from 10 years ago. I use a priority list, And sometimes I put extra credit in for market segments which are high growth. And so I go back to that Excel template and I add a 7th column for prioritization. And I say, gee, you know, here's 2 market segments which are small today, but I expect to be big in the future on a scale of 0 to 5. Can I give these market segment, these customer problems extra growth because these are going to be important segments in the future? And then I sell that around the company. I work to development. I work towards this. I work towards the sales and marketing team. And I say which ones should I prioritize? And sometimes this allows me to get a feature into development that potentially doesn't have revenue for this quarter inside of it. So I'm a big fan of adding a 7th column to the prioritization model that gets some of these models up here.
Ken, I also really like your idea of organizing a roadmap around personas, because that might also allow you to make sure you're not missing a persona too long. All right, so that concludes our Q&A portion. So can you just advance the slide, Ken?
Oh, sure.
So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you learned something. I know I did. And I want to invite you to register for our upcoming webinar. Our next one is on 7 reasons products fail. That's coming up next week. I think Kenny Prenzler, our other consultant, is leading that one.
He's brilliant, Rina. In case you're not sure of that, Kenny is brilliant. This is going to be a great webinar.
It is going to be a great webinar. It's going to be, I think, with Kenny and Jake. So it's going to be a lot of fun as well. And last but not least, at 280 Group, as I said at the beginning, we're really here to serve the needs of product professionals everywhere. So if you are interested in getting expert help for your team, please contact us. You'll find additional resources, of course, on our website, and a link, I think, or an email should be posted into the chat box. All right, a big thank you to Ken for this amazing presentation. I learned something from you every single time. So I appreciate all of the energy and the genuine care for mentorship and teaching that you have. All right, everyone, we'll see you again next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Rina. Thank you, Michelle.